So first, I would like to thank Sam and his team, as well as Westwood and all the sponsors. This is an excellent event. It's wonderful that we're doing this. I'm really honored to be here today to kind of share my story. We had a beautiful Mass this morning. It's wonderful to start your day with a Mass. I love that about working at the Catholic Community Foundation. We actually pray before meetings. It's a very different change of pace for me. So second, I need to apologize right out of the chute for my Minnesota accent. I'm going to try to limit my yeah, you betches and don't you knows to as little as I can. When my wife and I got married in 1985, we jumped into my 1975 Firebird and drove down to Dallas, Texas, and we lived there for a year, and I didn't pick up enough of the accent to keep it with me, but I love it. I'm mesmerized by the Dallas-Fort Worth accent. So let me set the stage here a little bit if I could. I am the Director of Professional Outreach and Investments at the Catholic Community Foundation. We are a $360 million foundation. We had $14 million in grants last year, which made us the 6th largest grant maker in the state of Minnesota. And most of my friends like to say to me, how do you like working at Catholic Charities? They just don't know who we are. We're still pretty invisible. And some of that just comes from the fact that we intentionally are a convener. We put people together. You know, we're not looking to raise money for ourselves. We're looking to be philanthropic partners. My role, I have a dual role. On the one hand, I'm Director of Professional Outreach, which means I work with accountants and attorneys and wealth advisors to create awareness about the foundation so they can refer to us. And then on the other side, I'm our investment officer. And I've had the great pleasure of working with the Trinity Fiduciary Group here. Quick sidebar story, I think this is important. We have 25% of our assets in what I would call a Russell 1000 index. And you could go buy the Russell 1000 index. It's like the top 1,000 companies in the nation based on their size, right? You could go buy it. But we said, you know what, we're going to hold this index in a separate account, and we're going to use Sam's team to screen out the companies that are antithetical to Catholic teaching. And as a part of that, we've had that process now for 10 years, and I can tell you that we are beating the index by the amount of expenses that we have to pay. So we're covering our cost and we're beating the index. And when I was explaining that 10-year performance to a group of individuals, a partner of ours, the Archbishop Hebda was sitting on their board, and he said, I actually said, and I refer to this as God's alpha. And he said, wow, I love that. I love that term. Is that a term I can use? And I said, absolutely. So by screening away the companies that are antithetical to Catholic teachings, you can indeed outperform a regular index even after expenses, because we're proof of it in the last 10 years. So I'm going to turn this a little sideways. We're going to go in a little different direction. People ask me, you know, Mike, how did you get to the Catholic Community Foundation? Today, September 7th, is my 2nd year anniversary. So it's kind of a special day for me. Prior to that, I was a partner and a principal of a wealth management firm, a $500 million firm. Had a lot of success, had a great income, had a lot of firm value, was very fortunate in my life. And it was fun and enjoyable to work with a lot of clients to help them reach their goals. But, you know, you wonder sometimes about your purpose. And so I had a client call me now about 4 years ago. I'm into my 18th year as an advisor. And he says, hey, Mike, I want to give away some money. And I said, okay. And he said, there's this woman who's a single mom, and she works at the post office. Can you call her up and set up an account? I want to give her some stock. And I thought, that's great. So, hey, Stacy, this is Mike, and you don't know me, but Fred wants to give you some money, and, you know, would you open up an account? And she's like, yeah, you know, I don't know. It probably seemed like a scam to her, right? So she agreed to open an account, and Fred put, my client Fred put some Google stock in her account. So I called her up and I said, Stacy, just so you know, your account's all set, and it's worth about $20,000. And there's that long pause on the phone, and then she kind of starts to cry. And she says, I didn't know he was going to give me this much money. I didn't have any idea. So I called him up and I said, hey, Fred, here's what happened. And he was like, this is great. He said, you know, I got to be Santa Claus and you got to be my elf. I want to do another one of these, he says. Okay, wow. He said, there's another single mom who works at a diner. Here's her number, call her up. So I called her up. It was the same story, you know, reluctance to open the account. She does, there's tears, and when she figures out how much she's getting, it's like I'm living in the middle of this guy's philanthropy. And it was just so enjoyable. It was kind of that sacred space that you get to be inside of, where you see the joy of the donor and the joy of the recipient. Well, I had never done this before. I mean, I'd helped clients give money away, but never like this. This was different. This was special. And so, about 5 months after that, a little unexpectedly, this guy passes away. And he leaves $3 million to a nephew in Pennsylvania who really didn't even know his Uncle Fred. And I thought, God, you know what? I didn't do a very good job here. This guy was trying to do some good with his money. He was trying to make a difference, and I wasn't paying attention. I got to get smarter at this. I'm going to go get my chartered advisor in philanthropy, because I knew that would help me better understand kind of what some of the motivations are and why people give. Why are they doing that? So while I'm getting my philanthropy designation, some things are happening in my life. My mom is moving from dementia to Alzheimer's. And anybody who's ever been through that, you get it, right? I'm watching my dad take care of her and provide a level of love and compassion that I didn't think was possible. And they have to sell their house and they have to make all these changes. And I'm starting to think, you know, what is this all about? What am I doing here, right? And then I have another really good client. He was a friend of mine. He's one of these guys who would call you up and say, hey, what'd you do for God today? Not how are my taxes or what's my performance, none of that. It was, what'd you do for God? He would describe himself as a dumb guy from the east side of St. Paul. And he would say, everything I have and everything I own, I owe to God. And he would talk about how these are the good old days. These are the days that matter. And he got a brain tumor in March, and by September he was dead. And I was like, wow, what am I doing here? Is this my job? Does God want me to be here to enrich myself and make other wealthy people wealthier? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? And I think a lot of 50-year-olds kind of go through this, right? This is normal to start to wonder, what's our purpose? So while all this is happening, I sit on my finance council at church, and we have an account with the Catholic Community Foundation, and the finance council says, Mike, you know about money, why don't you talk to those folks and see how we're doing? Okay. So I visit with a man who's now my colleague, and he's a 66-year-old guy, and he's listening to me, and he says, you know, I went through the same thing when I was in my 50s. You start to really discern what's important. He says, you should talk to our president, Ann Miller. So I met with Ann, and she kind of introduced this concept of a professional outreach where, you know, you would work with professionals to create awareness. And I was intrigued because it sounded right. It sounded good to me, like maybe I could have a broader impact. But, you know, I'm making good money, and last kid of 4 is almost through college, and it's all those things you're starting to debate. So my wife said, hey, you know what? I support this. If you want to make a change, I'll do it. Let's pray. Let's ask God to give us guidance. My wife is smart that way. So then I had my God moment. And my God moment was really pretty powerful. This is probably what made Sam get quiet. I had another client call me up, and he said, hey, I've got this friend of mine. He's got some money, but he doesn't know what he's doing at all. Do you want to visit with him? Well, sure, that's a referral, right? He said, you need to know that this guy, I met him when I was part of a group called Amicus. We would reach out to prisoners in jail and kind of visit with them as a corporal work of mercy. And I'm like, oh, okay. So picture in your mind a 68-year-old guy with a scruffy beard. He's got a camo jacket on and a Vietnam baseball hat. And he smells like a pack of cigarettes, right? You've got him in your mind now. And we sit down for a cup of coffee. And he says, hey, if Joe trusts you, then I trust you. Joe was my client. And I said, okay, well, great. Look, if I'm going to work with you, I'm going to need full disclosure. Because that's what financial people say, right? I want full disclosure. Well, he didn't know what that meant, because he was not a man of finance. So he sort of folded his hands, and he looked out the window, and he got a little choked up, and he kind of turned back, and he said, okay, I'll give you full disclosure. He said, I want you to know I believe in God. And I want you to know that God doesn't make junk or wasted souls. We live in a culture where we waste too much time on things that don't matter. He said, there's just not enough love. And I'm like, wow. Where is this going to go? I've done hundreds of prospect meetings in my lifetime, and they've never started like this. So he said, I was adopted, and I grew up in small-town America. My parents were grocery store owners, and I knew everything in the grocery store. I knew where everything went. I worked in that store, but by the time I was 18, my dad said, hey, you got to go figure it out on your own here. His limited friends, what few he had, were signed up to go to college. He didn't know anything about college, so he signs up for the U.S. Army. 5 days on the ground in Vietnam, he's killing people, and he's pretty good at it. And he tells me stories about how he dodges and avoids death. Very emotional, powerful stories. Grenades that are thrown at his feet where he says, Mike, this is a U.S. Army grenade. These always go off. This one didn't go off, he says. Running through open fields with wounded soldiers, guns going, he's still alive. His buddies that die in his arms because they had their face blown off. And he's like, don't misunderstand me, Mike. They've made movies about my division. But I'm not a hero, he says. I'm just a survivor. But I got to walk with the lions, he says. The real heroes who served our country. Sorry. He gets out of Vietnam, he's a full-blown alcoholic, 4-pack-a-day guy. He's driving home drunk from a party. He's got a passenger in the car, 2 in the back, boom, head-on collision. His passenger's dead. People in the back have broken bones. He's got 3 days of a coma. He wakes up. How can I get a beer? Where are my cigarettes? His first trip to jail would be for what you and I today would call date rape. And that's actually where my client met him in jail for the first time. It was a short stay. His second trip to jail would be his third wife's 12-year-old daughter or child sexual abuse. He had committed a life of destruction a mile wide. And as he told me these stories, he would talk about how grateful he is to God that this young girl that he harmed is okay, and that she's grown up and has a family and they have money, and he was so thankful to God for that. But now he was going to go to jail for real, because when you're a child sexual abuser, you're kind of on the wrong end of the totem pole. And he doesn't know what this is all about. He says, I don't know why I'm alive. I don't know why I'm here. I got to figure this out. So he starts to read. He says, I go to school. That's what he called it. He reads over 800 books while he's in prison because he's got time. And he reads wisdom and philosophy and the Quran and the Bible. And he begins to realize that there's more to life, and that there's this man who loves him and that suffered and that died for him. And he dodges and avoids death in jail a number of ways. And after one of these episodes where he really should have been killed, he kind of raises his hands to God and he says, I'm going to commit my life to you. I'm going to give my life to you, he says. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to give it to you. So he slowly, through really the power of love, he starts to befriend the people that even tried to harm him. And he doesn't want to leave jail. He's allowed, after a 15-year sentence, on his 10th year, they say, good service, you can go. And he's like, it's Shawshank Redemption. I don't want to go. I want to stay. This is where my family is. I feel safe here. These are people I care about. But he lands in a private halfway house right about when the owner of this halfway house is kicking out the manager, and he says, you're in charge. I'll let you stay here rent-free, but as these other drunkies and druggies are coming in here, you just make sure they don't mess up the place. I can do that, he says. He buys a van and he picks up drunk people all over the county, and he brings them to AA meetings because he was allowed to go through AA when he was in jail and get the power of the Holy Spirit and God in that exercise. And he says, I can do that. I can bring these people. So he's pretty limited as to what he can do. And he does this for 10 years, pretty faithfully. And an attorney from Iowa calls him and she says, hey, you don't know who I am. And you didn't know your father had married another woman, your stepmom. She just passed away down here in Iowa, and she had a big farm. And you're going to get 7 figures of money. 7 figures is $1 million for the non-numbers people here. And he looks at me and he says, I want to give it all away. I want to give it to the causes I care about, sharing and caring hands and Doctors Without Borders. And he rattled off a few more. And he said, Mike, I don't want to give it all away right away. Now, this is a guy with zero financial understanding, right? He says, I want to put it in this trust fund, this account that will grow and give and grow and give, because I want to name it after the people that loved and cared for me, because I want to be anonymous. Wow. And he reaches across the table and he puts his hand on my arm and he says, can you help me with this? Will you help me with this? And I don't hear his voice anymore. I hear a deeper, more powerful voice. And I'm overwhelmed. Wow. You see, I think God talks to us every day. And most of the time we aren't listening. But on this day, I wasn't going to escape our Heavenly Father. And so I said, you need to know where I'm at. And I began to explain to him that I was going through this process of change and that I'd been offered a position that I was considering. And as he realized what was happening, he was overcome with sadness because he could see that God was using him to change my life. And I think Sam did this morning. He went like this, right? We were instantaneously bonded. And he said, Mike, you're a normal guy. You have a nice job and nice clothes, and I don't hang out with people like you. I'm with drunkies and druggies. They're my friends. And he said, I have a great deal of pain and suffering that I've felt in my life. And he said, you don't understand that level of pain and suffering. He said, when I watched the movie Saving Private Ryan, there's that scene in the movie where our hero, Matt Damon, who plays Private Ryan, is in the cemetery. And it's the end of the movie where he's looking down at these grave sites of these people that gave their lives so that he could live. And Matt Damon says to his wife, he says, am I a good man? Have I led a good life? And he said, Mike, I came home from Vietnam and I messed it up. But he didn't say messed. And I said, look, there's still time. You're doing an amazing thing. You're walking in the footsteps of Jesus. Your story is your gift from God. We need to tell your story. Oh, I don't know, he says. I don't want to hurt anyone. I said, what if we made you anonymous? What if we kept you secret? So we began to talk about that, about the concept of telling a story. And I said, look, there was a guy named Paul Newman, famous actor. He was mixing salad dressing in a bathtub with a buddy of his. They were going to give it away as gifts to friends and family. And the buddy says, hey, we could make a company out of this. And Paul Newman says, I will do that if we give away all the profits to charity. And so I said to my friend, I'm here with a stir stick and a bathtub. I want to tell your story. And we can give away all the profits to charity, to fund your endowment, to make a bigger difference. And he thought about it. And I said, do you have any writings from Vietnam? Did you keep a diary? And he said, well, I did, but it's kind of a mess, you know. I said, I'd love to see what you have. So he sends me a letter. And because he follows a beat writer in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, a guy named Ruben Rosario, who writes stories about the little guy and prisoner rights kind of things, he sent one to him as well. No return address. He didn't know who it was from. He just got this thing. And Rosario does his homework and research, and he doesn't know what to think of this letter. But he publishes it in an August of 2016 Sunday paper. The title of his article was, "A Vet Writes a Letter to the Man He's Killed." And you get to see the soul of this man. And my friend, he contacts me and he says, hey, I've been published. Look, I've been published. I said, hey, no kidding, you've been published. And of course, I didn't say kidding. I said, you got a great story to tell. Let's tell your story. So I commissioned an author to tell his story. And she went to visit him, and she put her recorder down on the table at 9 a.m. and it was on till 2 p.m. And he talked about his life. And she came back and she said, Mike, this is real Oprah Winfrey stuff. I said, yeah, I know. This is an amazing story. And so she got to become friends with him over the past year. The book is out as of last week. I had 150 copies printed. It's not online yet. Someday soon, hopefully. I met with a book expert, I guess I would call him, and he said, "What's your goal of this book?" What are you trying to accomplish? And of course, he told me every time he asked people that question, they say, well, I want to be a millionaire and I want to be famous. And I said, well, we're given many gifts and we travel different paths. And I said, I know some people face great hardship in their lives and some are blessed at birth and they never really know what hardship is. And some of us find faith and others don't believe in anything at all. And I said, my hope is that with this book that people will say, you know, I am thankful for what I have. And maybe they'll ask themselves, am I generous with the gifts I have? And do I really know truly what pain and suffering is? Can I help people that are maybe a little less fortunate than me? Am I spiritual? Am I growing my soul? And I said, look, I think life is short and it's precious, and we waste a lot of time on things that don't matter. And like Sam says, there's just not enough love. Thank you.